have a chat. Oh, okay. Hello, Dr. Portnoy. So we went from a webinar to a meeting, and we'll just, everyone's so used to Zoom meetings now, everyone is nicely muted. And if you're not, if you can go ahead and mute, and we'll be able to start the meeting. So as I mentioned, we are waiting for the awards to come in. If you can imagine, 34 state seed grant programs across the country. NOAA and the Department of Commerce and the Grants Management Division is pretty busy trying to get awards out to everyone. So as I had sent you all an email to, continue to work with your sponsored programs office to set up an interim account so that you can start getting your project started by February 1. And in full disclosure, I find that when I am talking, I get ahead of myself and I end up swallowing air and start coughing. So I hope I won't do that this time. So you all keep your fingers crossed there. But welcome again. Let's see. I've got my screen share on, but it doesn't look like it's green. So do you all see that very first page that the awardee will begin? Okay, the webinar will begin. Okay, so we'll just go ahead. So welcome. We have our fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23 awards from our biennial research competition. My name is Mia Zielinski, Assistant Director for Research and Fiscal Administration on Texas Sea Grants, Research Coordinator. And we also have Sarah Carney, our Communication Manager, who will take over the last half of the meeting to go over items related to communications and publications on related to your project. We're in the process. We have a job opening for a data reporting manager. So to be determined, that reporting manager will help us with the reporting process on your projects. And so the webinar is being recorded, and we will make it publicly available on our website, as well as the other presentation documents. If you can, save your questions for the research awardee information presentation, save your questions till the end after that session, and then we can have a little Q&A at that point, and then we'll go on to the communication part of the presentation session. One thing that is different is in our reporting structure. Years ago, and Dr. Portnoy and Dr. Wetz will remember this, but as a research coordinator, I helped assist with the reporting requirements on a research project. And that then in 2017, we had a change in structure, and it went over to a complete reporting team. But now we're bringing it back where I will assist you in facilitating your reporting. So again, we'll have a Q&A at the very end of the webinar to go over both the reporting session and the publication communication session. So I've introduced myself, Mia Zielinski, Assistant Director, and I have a Research Administration Program Assistant, Hunter Hawley, who is assisting Dr. Plotkin and I with the Research Administration Program of Texas Sea Grant. So our overall administration program for Texas Sea Grant, of course, Dr. Plotkin is Director. Cindy Lyle is our Senior Associate Director, and she's also our Extension Team Program Leader. So all of the extension specialists and agents that work with Texas Sea Grant across the coast in helping integrate research with education, extension, and outreach. Cindy oversees that extension team. Of course, myself, I already mentioned that we have a position open for a data reporting manager. Sarah Carney is communications manager, Hunter, research administration program assistant, and Sarah has two communication staff working with her, Corleanne Parker as a program specialist and Allie Dickey as a program assistant. So these are our new 7 projects that we're funding with a variety of affiliations from A&M to University of Houston, Texas State University, University of Texas at Arlington, Corpus Christi, University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, Corpus Christi, the Hart Research Institute for the Gulf of Mexico Studies. So we're very excited about this new group of awards and projects that will get going. I was one of our funded researchers, Dr. Jessica Dutton at Texas State University, during 2020 with the beginning of the COVID outbreak and people being dislocated, not able to do field research so much. We had a couple of rapid response projects that we were able to fund, and Dr. Dutton's was one where we were able to provide a little bit of funding as seed money. It wasn't a whole lot, but it kind of got her going. And as a success story, she then submitted a proposal to this most recent biennial research competition, and the reviewers looked at her proposal work as a continued topic of interest, and so we were able to fund that project. So we're excited about that. We have a few co-PIs and a few brand new researchers that we're going to be funding here at A&M and across the state. And so this is just a great diverse group of projects that we'll be managing, and this webinar will help provide you with some assistance on what we will be helping you over the life of your project. And so your responsibilities and management topics to ensure success of the life of your project, from budgeting expenses and invoice processing to any post-award revisions like an extension or a revision in budget. I have a couple of other sponsored research requirements that I'll talk about. Then we'll have a short Q&A, and then we'll go into the reporting requirements on your project, the why, what, when, and how. And then we'll go into the publications, reporting, and communications part of the session with Sarah Carney. So starting out first with budgeting, expenses, and invoice processing. Mainly, and you would know this as researchers who have been funded previously on other projects from other sponsors, we want you to spend according to what you outlined in your proposal per your scope of work and your budget justification. So you've outlined that, it's been approved for funding, and we want you to be successful in working your scope of work and aligning your budget and budget justification to your scope of work. Timely expense processing is important in conjunction with the scope of work and your timeline. Cost share reporting is required as you have committed 50% of your federal funds request as cost share, because that is what NOAA requires of us. For every $2 that you spend with your budget, you have to report 50% or $1 cost share. So you have to keep that in mind as you're invoicing Texas A&M sponsored research services for reimbursement of your costs on your project. You also need to report that 50% worth of cost sharing. And I would encourage your business administrators to work with your sponsored programs office administrators and also with the Texas A&M Sponsored Research Service project administrators to establish your cost share accounts for reporting that cost share. So as far as the actual invoice processing, all invoices are processed via Texas A&M Sponsored Research Services. The point of contact for invoice processing for the Sponsored Programs Office and Texas A&M SRS will be provided within your award contractual agreement. So there are forms within the agreement that have the points of contact for invoicing, the project administrator, and that sort of thing. So that will evolve. And as A&M receives funding on our prime award from NOAA, and Sponsored Research Services begins that award acceptance process, and they begin drafting agreements for your projects, again, know that takes time with agreements being drafted and sent to your institutions for review and execution, and you send it back to Texas A&M Sponsored Research Services to be fully executed. All of that takes time. So even with us waiting on the award to come in from NOAA, that even if it had arrived January 1, it still takes the Sponsored Programs offices at both institutions time to draft those agreements and get them fully executed. So we've always recommended that PIs work with their Sponsored Programs office to get interim accounts set up so you can start working your project. So the topic of post-award revisions, that is not necessarily encouraged, but we want to work with you. If you have needs that will arrive, and that's just the nature of life over the life of your project. But any requests would need to come to me. You just email me and with a written justification for review and approval. The types of post-award revision requests would be a budget revision. Example, perhaps more analysis was needed. And so you would want to revise your budget to possibly increase the budget category of professional services and decrease another category that you would not need, perhaps a portion of the travel budget. So budget revisions are certainly allowed, but if that occurs, send me an email, write a justification for review so that I can look at which budget categories are needing to go up and down as an offset. And then just note that the original total cost of the budget is required to stay the same. So you'd want to balance that out. Some researchers and their project administrators simply take their original budget and add a couple of columns and show what it originally was proposed at and approved at, the changes you want to make, and then the revised total. And then you can see the original total and the revised total are the same. So that's kind of great to show it all on one spreadsheet, just as a suggestion. Another post-award revision is if the principal investigator changes. So for example, if the PI moves to a new institution, and we might want to move then that PI's budget to their new institution. And then there are times when a post-award revision request would need to extend the project due to a scope of work delay, with or without a budget revision. For example, a hurricane prevented the ability to perform sampling. That's an obvious example of where you might have to extend out the date of your project. As you can imagine, our awardees from the prior competition, they had their projects that started February 1 of 20 through 22. So 2020 and COVID, we had a lot of delays, of course, with field work that couldn't occur, and we understood that. And so we worked with our PIs, just encouraged them to continue to work the scope of their project as best they can, stay safe, don't do the travel, don't do the field studies, whatever's needed, and we'll look at closer towards the end of that first year term to, or when at the end of the second year term, to possibly extend the project out so that you could have a successful 2-year project. So that's all understandable. And also know that your year 1 budget, as you spend through the timing of your scope of work, at the end of year 1, which would be January 31 of 23, any funds remaining from your year 1 will carry forward into your year 2. So don't be concerned about that. Sometimes I have to tell the sponsored research services to make sure they put that in the agreement. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen enough agreements where I try to make it helpful for the PIs and for their institutions. So just know that year 1 funds do carry over into year 2 without having to do a revision or a modification agreement. So whenever you do have to request a revision, submit the following. So you email me and let me know you need to make a revision of some sort. If it has to do with the budget, you'd want to show your original budget, the cumulative spending, the balance remaining, any changes that you're needing to make, and then the revised budget. Your justification summary for that budget revision or extension or whatever the issue is, just a couple of paragraphs. It doesn't have to be a dissertation. Just a little Word doc. Clearly state your purpose and need for a revision or an extension. If it's an extension for time, justify the purpose or need, and then also state what work remains to be completed so we can see your timeline and make sure everything's on a successful track for you. Provide the new date that you're looking to extend or provide a new timeline, and then confirm whether or not the scope of work will change. A lot of these changes, these examples that I'm giving you, more often than not, the scope of work will not need to be changed, and you want to continue with the original scope of work that you proposed in your proposal. But life happens, and you might find that you have to change your scope of work and change a little bit of direction on your project. That's okay. We just need you to confirm and let us know whether that would occur, because that sort of item, while all of these I can approve on behalf of Dr. Plotkin here at Texas Sea Grant, a scope of work change I would have to send for pre-approval by NOAA. But again, even that's kind of unusual to have a scope of work change request. And again, just submit for approval to me, and I'll work with you. If I don't understand something, I'll kick it back to you and explain it a little bit further. I need a little more detail, and it's pretty seamless there. So there are a couple other sponsored research requirements from Texas A&M University. There was a bill that was passed in, I think it was 2015, that requires conspicuous disclosure of the identity of each sponsor of research and any public communication of the data generated in the performance of sponsored research. So it's just basically, if you have any public communication related to your project, you need to identify who the sponsor is and of that data that's being generated. I have a document here, and we'll post this. I think it's already posted to our webpage, but this is where it's talking about the requirements relating to disclosure of sponsors and data generated in the performance of sponsored research. So any faculty member or employee of the system or one of its members, including non-faculty scientists and engineers who conduct or participate in a sponsored research project where the results are being communicated. And that's probably not anything different from what you may have run across on other sponsors on grants that you have. And then there's a NOAA data sharing directive, which ensures that any environmental data produced as a result of NOAA funded grants and your subrecipients that you might have on your project, that any of that environmental data that's produced is made publicly accessible in a timely fashion, typically within 2 years. And final manuscripts of peer-reviewed publications are deposited with the NOAA Central Library. And then we also have as you were familiar with when we notified you of your project being funded, we had sent you the data management plan template where you completed that information. So we will also provide you with a data management plan template at the completion of your project. So what you have proposed in your award phase may be different from where you're actually disclosing information. But the NOAA data sharing directive is this document. Again, this is on our webpage, but this is just showing you where to save your information. And it's also in the same document that I had sent to you all, as it was kind of an opening cover sheet to the data management plan that you completed for us. So as you know, our Texas Sea Grants overarching goals of our research program, and as you know from submitting your proposal to us and integrating your results of your research with education, extension, and outreach, that's our overall goal. We want you during the life of your project to report on the accomplishments and outcomes of your scope of work. You will want to report on how those accomplishments evolve into being measured as impacts for return on investment to Texas Sea Grant, the state of Texas and Texans. So as our overarching goal, meeting with our strategic plan, is that we've always wanted to support outcome-oriented research that spans broad areas of the natural, physical, social, behavioral, economic sciences, and engineering, and to make research investments that will generate social, economic, and environmental impacts in Texas. And so we wanted to put this back in front of you for our desire of you, as you're working your plan, your scope of work of your research project, and as you begin to report on your project, always keep in mind how you will then be integrating your research with extension and outreach. So for example, how many communities have begun using a technological tool that you may have developed with your project? And we will want you to report on how that tool would have a measurable impact to improve resilient communities. So again, the research and extension integration is required as part of your funding from Texas Sea Grant. So again, the research, informing, validating, engaging, all back to extension, training, community members, advising, consulting. So we want you to maintain an integration plan throughout your project. So again, just as we had in our 2022-2024 RFP, and you had stated in your proposal how you were going to integrate your research results with the broader impacts of extension education and outreach. Again, I'll just repeat again, throughout the life of your project, incorporate that integration plan with your collaborators, whether they were Texas Sea Grant Extension Program planning specialists or fishery specialists or agents or other collaborators that you had mentioned in your proposal. So at this point, this covers and is the end of the research awardee information session. I wanted to see if you had any questions at this point, and I'll look and see. There's nothing in the chat right now. It might be easier to wait to the very end, but if anyone wants to type anything into the chat, they're welcome to do that. It might be best just to continue on. So we'll do that. Again, just email me if you have any questions. I am more than happy to assist in any way that I can. So the next session has to do with reporting requirements. How, what, when, how, all of that. Well, it's why, what, when, and how. So reporting on your project, why? Well, it's a sponsor requirement. Our prime sponsor, NOAA, requires us to report on an annual basis. And so we require you all to report on an annual basis on the work done on your project, your successes, our Texas Sea Grant successes. And so we report your results along with Texas Sea Grant's results on our reports that we submit to the National Sea Grant Office and to our prime sponsor, NOAA. So what do we report? Well, we report measurable metrics, measurable performance indicators, performance measures, impacts of those metrics and measures on the communities, and publications. And then when, again, we report on an annual basis, but what we are wanting you all to focus on is not so much as completing a report once a year. We've changed our reporting structure somewhat in reporting so that it's easier for you all to report on your project as things occur, as activities occur. So we will have your project available for you to just report on progressively with status updates throughout the year. And then how will we be doing the reporting and requiring you to report on your project is through the EC grant proposal and reporting system. So the Texas Sea Grant reporting team is me right now. But again, we have a position open for a data reporting manager. But I'm responsible in working with you to have you collect your project reporting information. We'll just work together to get our reports done for our sponsor. So again, the whys on reporting requirements. Well, any principal investigator receiving funding from Texas Sea Grant is required to report on the progress of their project and provide other information that Texas Sea Grant is required to report to our National Sea Grant Office and to our prime sponsor, NOAA. And another important reason why is not just because our sponsor requires it, but the reporting data allows us to measure Texas Sea Grant funded research outcomes from your projects, and we're able to then measure that against our Texas Sea Grant strategic plan. So if you remember when you were developing your proposal in EC grant, I had a form where we wanted you to check off, what were the funding priorities that you were focusing on with your focus area, and which goal did it meet from our strategic plan. And so that's the same sort of thing we'll be looking for you to report data to us to measure how those outcomes will achieve the goals of the strategic plan that you chose in your proposal. So therefore, be as thorough as possible when you're completing your reporting requirements and submitting your publications. And so under reporting requirements, the what is the different metrics, performance measures, and impacts. These are all defined and set by our National Sea Grant Office. And so the different data indices that we will be asking from you, we'll be able to provide you with definitions of what these are, and will guide you on how to report this data. So there are 8 different types of metrics. For example, like including the number of volunteer hours, citizen scientists that you might have on your project, or public engagement, any meetings that you might have, and quantifying the metrics of the number of people that attended that meeting. That's a reportable metric. So I'll go over those 8 different metrics in a moment. And then there are 10 different performance measures, which might then look further into how different measures of activities that occurred on your project, how they might impact economically the communities that you are engaged in. We also look to have what is called an accomplishment statement or an impact statement per project, with qualitative summaries of that project's impact on a community and academia. Another type of reporting data that we receive is leverage funding that you might receive as an influence of being funded by Texas Sea Grant. Students and partners that you work with on your project. And then of course, publications, and where you will also ask for you to provide an ORC ID. So under publications, as a high level, just to let you know, in our sample publication form on EC Grant, I know you can't see this, but this is just showing that when you're doing your progressive reporting in EC Grant throughout the year, if you have a publication later on in the life of your project, or if you have a meeting or whatever, this type of page is where you would be filling out some information and uploading your documents. So all publications that are produced based on Texas Sea Grant funded research must be reported to the National Sea Grant Library. So that's a success, that's an outcome of your research project. These would include peer-reviewed journal articles and other publications. Again, publication of research results in peer-reviewed journals and presentations at professional conferences. These are important metrics for evaluating the research program at Texas Sea Grant with your funded project. And we ask that you upload the final PDF publication when applicable in EC Grant. Sarah Carney will cover the communication session. We'll discuss all of this later in the webinar. So going into a little more detail of what you would be reporting on your project. These are the 8 different metrics that you would report on: meetings, workshops, and conferences, public or professional presentations, organized volunteers that might be working on your project, any educational engagement activities. And so these sorts of metrics you would report in the reporting section in EC Grant as activities occur. So again, we're not wanting you to wait until the end of the year to do your reporting. We have it set up so that you will be able to report as your activities occur. So each of these lines here, these are the 8. So there's 2 sections for each area, basically. That is a reportable metric. So the number of meetings, workshops, or conferences that you would have organized related to your project, and your students that are funded on your project, any of their meetings or conferences. And then another metric for that meeting or workshop or conference would be to provide the count of attendees. So any public or professional presentations, we would want to know that the metric count number of those presentations, either by the researcher or the funded student on that project. And then the other metric would be the number of attendees at those presentations. So under organized volunteers, the count, again, the metric number of volunteers that researchers or funded students manage during the organized or sponsored activity, and then the number of hours that those volunteers, the number of hours of time they put in on that project. That's a reportable metric. And then under engagements related to educational activities, a metric is the total number of preschools through 12th grade, the number of students who participated in those activities at that organized or presented event, and then the total number of educators for the preschools through 12th grade, those educators who participated in that activity event presented by a funded researcher or student. So these are the kinds of metrics that are outcomes to be reported through the timeline based on your scope of work or your project. And you may or may not have these items. So if it doesn't reply, you can just simply put nothing to report. Another of what we report, another data measurement or the performance measure areas. And you would also just report these as the activities occur. So this varies over the life of any type of project, whether it is related to sustainable fisheries and aquaculture project, whether it's related to a resilient communities and economies project, or a healthy coastal ecosystems. You may or may not have any or all of these items, just like the metrics may or may not apply. So on the performance measures, there are 10, and it could be, for example, the number of acres that you protected, your project was able to justify as protected, enhanced, or restored. What economic impacts and justify what positive economic impact your project, the outcomes resulted in. Number of employed students, environmental literacy and workforce development type products. Provide a link to that product when it's applicable. You might have a performance measure of fisheries, sustainability, and safety. And we would want you to justify the specifics of how your project sustained the safety of the fisheries industry. Hazard resiliency and technical training is another performance measure. How many resource managers may have been engaged on your project. Sustainability development, again, it needs a justification. Tools, technology, and information systems, like if your project developed an application or some other tool, you would provide a link to that product. And then any informal education. And we'll provide further definitions on these at a later time. We have some documents that define these into more detail. And again, you may have all or just a few that may or may not relate to your project. But these are performance measures that we would report on your project. So I'm going back to, so we've gone over what we're reporting. We've gone over the 8 metrics types of data that you would report, the 10 performance measures, and then we're going into accomplishment statements or impact statements. So these are reported annually. It's not so much an activity like a meeting that you held, but it's a statement of what you accomplished over the life of your of that year's worth of activity on that project. Statements are succinct narratives of the results of the year-long research effort. Accomplishments are activities that are conducted without emphasis on evaluating the effectiveness of the activities. It's just stating what you were able to accomplish. So your project had your objectives, your rationale, your methodology. Well, of your objectives, what were you able to accomplish this year in a succinct statement, like a paragraph form? Now, impact statements are the results of those accomplishment activities. Impact statements have measurable and significant economic, societal, and/or environmental benefits. So again, the statements, whether they're an accomplishment statement or an impact statement, they are succinct narratives of the results of a year-long research effort. So again, to explain a little bit more of a difference between the accomplishment versus an impact, as I stated, the accomplishments are the activities that are conducted. They're distinct from impact statements because they're reflecting the ongoing activities that have not otherwise been measured or evaluated as yet. Whereas the impacts, as I said earlier, they're the results of those ongoing activities that are measurable and have a significant economic, societal, and/or environmental benefit. So as a former colleague, communication manager, had always said, it's a great way to think about it is that with follow-up, some accomplishment statements grow up to be impact statements. So on an annual basis, we'll ask for an accomplishment statement. And as your project goes into the ending of the second year and even beyond when your project has expired, we will follow up with you because some of the accomplishment statements that you highlighted that you were able to accomplish and wrote a statement on, those may now, longer beyond the life of your 2-year project, may then be able to quantify the impact of those activities. And that's where we will reach back out to you, not only for publications, but we'll reach out back to you to see if you are able to then write an impact statement with those measurable and significant benefits. And you also might have an impact statement pretty quickly within your 2-year timeline. So that's, again, this is just kind of giving you an idea there. And I've got a couple of examples and then just a quick how-to. So whenever you're putting together an impact or an accomplishment statement, the how-to is, it's kind of like a brief paragraph. It's like a news announcement. And so, it's, what's the headline? The title, the headline, present tense, Texas Sea Grant funded this project, which resulted in this or that or the other. So it's a headline, like a news release. You simply would list your primary or secondary focus area, whether it's resilient communities and economies, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, healthy coastal ecosystems. You'd list your program partners, the same partners, agencies, private companies or corporations, NGOs, governments, etc. The same partners that you listed on your proposal. and in the 90-2 project summary form that we had you give us some of the program partner information that Hunter helped us gather that information from you. So the title, the headline, the news release, what's the headline, your focus area, your partners, and then to draft the statement, it's what we call employing the 4 R's. So there's a why, what happened, what was the outcome. So it's the relevance, response, then the results, and then a recap. So your relevance, again, it kind of comes from your proposal relevance statement. This headline, this accomplishment, why did it happen? Why did you do this research? Why should this be considered important to others? And again, take it from your proposal relevance statement. Well, the response, what happened? What research did you do in response to the need that you outlined in your relevance statement? And then the results, the outcome. This designates the statement further as either an accomplishment or an impact. So if it's an accomplishment, this research project has produced this data, as opposed to impact, how that research accomplishment, how did that impact and change the world? So that's kind of an example of between the 2 different types of outcomes that you would put in your little statement that could be written like a news release. And then you would just do a very brief recap summary, which is often almost the same as the title. So all of these, just 250 words per section. So it's just something that would be, not even a third of a page or a half of a page. But this is the how-to. And then to give you a couple of examples, this is a sample accomplishment statement from one of our recent researchers. Their Texas Sea Grant supported citizen science-driven flood resiliency, and their primary focus area was resilient communities and economies. They listed their partners, and so the relevance and response, result, and recap, boom, 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 there it is, there's your statement. So the relevance for their project was the ability to automatically and accurately estimate floodwater depth at street level. So after Hurricane Harvey, of course, that was a big need. And through this study, this funded research project, the researcher was able to develop an application tool. So there's a tool, a product that he can report to us, and we can measure that as a tool that was a performance measure as a result of his project. They were able to take pictures before and after flood events of stop signs throughout the community to get an idea of gosh, where floodwater was occurring and the depth, which may not always be obvious. So this was a wonderful response that he was working on. He developed that, and the result was that the application allowed even citizen scientists to log into the app, create an account, upload pictures, pre and post flooding, pin them on a map. I mean, it was just really exciting, and it gauged and calculated the depth of the floodwater at different locations of the photo. So there's that news release, there's that accomplishment statement. And then the recap, as you can see, is the same basically as the title. So that's a good accomplishment statement. Now, an example of an impact statement, this goes back to a project that was funded a few years back, but it gives an opportunity to show where there were different performance measures that they were definitely able to show the accomplishment made that economic impact, and they specifically justified the dollar amount of that economic impact. They were able to gather that information and document it. And so this was a project that Texas Sea Grant supported related to a super intensive shrimp culture research project. And they were able to document that it resulted in an estimated $10 million of economic industry impact to that industry. So here's the news announcement title. Their focus area was sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. They listed their partners. And so again, they have the 4 R's: relevance statement, response, results, and then the recap. So the relevance taken from their proposal was, as the nation and the world's population continues to grow, aquaculture is going to play an even a greater role. Demand for seafood. So they're looking for a more cost-effective seafood production while also decreasing any environmental footprint. So his response with Texas Sea Grant funding this project was to develop and pilot a new technology to culture shrimp. And they were able to prove yielding an increase in crops, resulting in the reduction of cost to the shrimp mariculture industry. So his results in the impact, again, impact statement of his activities, he was able to show that 2 aquaculture businesses using this new technique that he developed with this project, that 2 businesses, and 2 in Florida and 1 in Texas, by using this new product, were able to be sustained. And they reportedly combined an economic benefit after using this product that was developed. They were able to have a documented economic benefit of $7 million. And in addition to that, with the 3 businesses being sustained, and again, that's one of the 10 performance measures I had mentioned previously, they were able to report 112 jobs were sustained. So there's a data performance measurement of jobs being sustained. There were also jobs that were created that they were able to document and report on. And so the overall recap of the impact of those activities, the impact statement, was where Texas Sea Grant supported this super intensive shrimp culture research project, resulted in an estimated, you can't see the 10 million, but the 10.2 million impact to the industry, the economic impact, favorable impact to that industry. So that's showing you the example of an accomplishment statement and an example of an impact statement. And you don't have to worry about knowing all this now. We're just presenting it all to you. We'll have all this information. It's already on our webpage for you to review. We're in the process of revising some of those documents, but for the most part, you'll be able to have more of an understanding as you're going into your project and as you conduct your reporting. So we've been over the why and the what. We're continuing with the what else do you report. So this topic will be leverage funding. Report is received. So leverage funds are any funds that researchers receive beyond Texas Sea Grant's original prime award. So we receive our prime award funds from NOAA, and we federally flow those out to you on your research projects. But then any funds that you all receive beyond the funds that we support you on your projects, any new funds are considered influenced and are reported as contributing towards accomplishing Texas Sea Grant strategic plan goals and objectives. So leverage funding is influenced by Texas Sea Grant because you have received funding on your project. You have received leverage funding and it's influenced by Texas Sea Grant, but it's administered by another organization. For example, so if you use this Sea Grant funded project to leverage funds from other sources, like your university or state agency or foundation. This would be, for example, your project may have, because of the results of your project and being funded by Texas Sea Grant, you then were able to receive funding from another sponsor, like an NSF funded grant. So that NSF funded grant would be considered influence leveraged funds. So you would report that to us as it's received, and you would list your project title on that leveraged funding that you received, the total funding amount, and that project's start date, that project's end date, and that project's sponsored. So that's leveraged funding that you would receive as being influenced from being funded by Texas Sea Grant. And then lastly, other what's to the reporting requirements are the partners that you had listed in your proposal. And you would report these partners each year, because you may have new partners that you end up collaborating with. So we would want you to provide an updated list every year. So partners, organizations that you listed in your proposal and you have worked on and have worked with on your project. So on the reporting requirements for your project, we'll go over the when. So all of the what's, when does this get reported? As I've said, on some things as activities occur, metrics and performance measures, or leverage funding as you might be receiving leverage funds, you would report that as that occurs. But our reporting process is on an annual basis, as most research projects. You report on an annual basis, but we will set up your project reporting so that you can report progressively throughout the year. And we'll send out quarterly reminders to you. So at any time throughout the year, you can be recording your activities on your project. It's still an annual report, but we want you to progressively report on it throughout the year. So you won't have to submit multiple reports throughout a year, but we will send you quarterly reminders with dates for you to be thinking of. I need to, gosh, I haven't had a chance to report this meeting that I was able to set up, and attendees, number of attendees for that meeting or whatever, then you'll have an opportunity with our reminders for you to get that information into your report on your project. The reporting period follows your award period of performance dates. And so from February 1 through January 31 of the following year. So your reporting would start with the February 1 start date through next January. And then the following year, that February 1 through that January 31 of 24. And we break the reporting year down into quarters. So from the February 1 start date, you've got the first quarter listed here, the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. But again, we want you to report progressively throughout the year as activities occur. But in sending out quarter reminders, we want you to report no later than the first Friday of the month following quarter end. So at the end of this first quarter, 1st of May, you'll be reporting. 1st of August, you'll be reporting. If you haven't already been reporting throughout the months there, at the end of the third quarter in October, you should be reporting throughout that summer, but as your activities occur, but certainly by the 1st of November. Final reports at the end of your 2-year project are due the first Friday of March following the ending day of your project. So to give you an idea, again, the wins, I've got the same quarterly breakdown here. So your reporting schedule, report progressively throughout the year as activities occur, but no later than the first Friday of the month following quarter end. So it's an annual report, that you're reporting again progressively throughout the year, we'll send out a quarterly reminder that you should have gotten an update. And even if it's, finally got the agreement fully executed, have ordered parts, have hired a postdoc, whatever, report that by the first Friday of May, first Friday of August, and so forth. And then a final report again after your project ends. And then just like the proposal submission in EC grant, you'll be reporting in your project. Your proposals have been promoted to a project. And so once we get that going and send you out a reminder, you'll be able to look at your project in EC grant and report on all of the sections that I've gone over, the what's, the different metrics, the 8 different metrics, the 10 different performance measures, the leverage funding, any publications, all of that will be in your report that you can just click on, kind of like you did with your proposal. Just click on that section, report as best you can, save it. If it's completed, click on that you've completed it. But we've got guidelines for you on all of this. But so you'll be reporting in EC grant just as you submitted your proposal. So some additional information when you're reporting to keep in mind, qualitative versus quantitative. So you've got these metrics, you've got these 10 different performance measures you may or may not have as a result of your project. There are important qualitative details that you should provide in your reporting that are not quantitative in nature. So it's providing the story behind the numbers, and that's how we want you to provide us, what occurred and when did it occur and what was the metric on that, and just the story behind it. Sell your project. Our reports are read by policymakers and stakeholders in our annual reports, and our communication team will go out and discuss your project with you and take pictures and report results as that occurs. When you're reporting on your project, report all the data that you can, and we will perform a review. So when you report using EC grant, we'll filter the information and the data prior to submitting. We may need to reach out to you to clarify or add to any information you provided to us, but there will be a full review and final edits prior to our submitting our annual report to our National Sea Grant Office, which is June of every year that we submit to our National Sea Grant Office. And in November of every year, we repackage that data and report to our prime sponsor, NOAA. Their reporting is due the end of every November. And so I'd like for you not to hesitate to report. Report what you can. It's easier to revise rather than creating from scratch. Be proactive with any issues that you might have early on. If you have any reporting issues, contact the reporting team. Contact me. If I don't know the answer, I'll get you the answer. As we're working through our kind of a change to our reporting structure, we're wanting to make it easy for you. And this was a lot of information given to you, but it's something that you will ingest and digest slowly over the life of your project. So there's no need to be too overwhelmed. It's just providing you the information so that you can review it later and report on it. And we have resources available to you that are on our webpage. And as we update some of the information, we'll get that on there. We'll also, at the end of this webinar this week, we'll be sure to, we'll upload a recording and we'll upload our presentation document to our Texas Sea Grant funding award reporting page. And so there are 4 chats in the chat box. The next session will be we'll be covering the publication reporting and communication section, but I'm gonna look at the chat right quick and see if there are any questions that would be helpful to answer now. Carrie had to leave, that's okay. She'll listen to the recording. And let's see, Jessica will be leaving too, so that's okay, that's good. That's no questions yet at this time. So I will hand it over to Sarah and let me stop my share. And Sarah, I'll ask her to unmute.
Hi, Mia. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen and I will get started on this. I'm not quite as fancy as Mia with her 2 screens, and so I'm a little bit slower at this, but we will make it through. And are y'all able to see that?
Yep, we're good.
We're good. Okay,
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. So first of all, this is our communications team. Mia introduced us earlier, but here's some faces that go along with the names. And so there's me, there's Allie Dickey, and there's Corley Ann Parker. You may hear from us. We may reach out to you to chat with you about your research, or for just various reasons. So if you see those names, that's who we are, and what we look like. Mia touched on this as well a little bit, but why report on publications? And, you know, I'll get into this in a minute, but when I talk about publications for you researchers, that's mainly going to be, you know, those peer-reviewed publications, although you may have some other publications that you may want to tell us about. As a publicly funded organization, we must document our impacts and accomplishments. We must tell our progress, and your progress is often reflected in your publications, and so we want to include that in our reports as well. What is considered a publication is it's a bit broad. It's obviously there's your peer-reviewed publications. I think that's the most obvious, but it helps to look at the National Sea Grants Library's guidelines for what is considered a publication. I think the main thing that we care about is if it's something that is produced because it was sponsored in part by our program. And then also if it communicates the results of research, we want to know about that. Also something that's intended for public dissemination. If you make a flyer for the public telling them about the results of your research, that's a great thing we want to know about, or a brochure or something like that. Or even if you make a website intended to disseminate your research, we'd like to know about that too. Also that's an acceptable format. And what that means, that can mean a lot of things. It can be, I have a whole list here of things that it could possibly be. It's honestly easier for me to tell you what is not a publication. But first, I do want to say that we want to make sure that these publications are Section 508 compliant. So that's the ADA stuff. We want to make sure that a screen reader can read it. And the main thing is, you know, don't send me a picture of something or a screenshot of something. If you, you know, something in a PDF that it's readable like that, then generally that's pretty good. And that's something that we can totally work with you on and help you with. I specifically want to talk about peer-reviewed publications because that's going to be the vast majority, probably about 90% of the publications that is going to concern you as researchers. We have a new submission system through NOAA. We used to use the National Sea Grant Library specific collection that was through Rhode Island Sea Grant. And we have actually merged with NOAA, and they're a much larger repository of publications. And so we are now a collection within NOAA's broader library. So that means that we have their resources and their help, but we also have to adhere to their standards. And one of those is we need to have the accepted manuscript of your paper. So not, and this can be a little confusing, which is why I've included a link down here at the bottom for a little extra information about what that means exactly. But we don't mean the version of record or the published version, as you might call it. Basically the one that when I look it up on Web of Science that comes up, that's published on the journal's website. And the reason we don't want that is because that's publisher owned and we can't give away the publisher's content for free. If it's open access, then that's a different story, that's fine. But if it's not open access, then we want the author's accepted manuscript, which will be the version that you have, that you own. The publisher doesn't own that version. This is before it gets its watermarks and stuff like that. And I know this can be a little confusing. So if you ever want to, ask me or send me specific questions about what that means, I'm happy to help out with that. And then also I want to note that for peer-reviewed publications, you don't have to worry about 508 compliance. NOAA will actually take care of that for us. So what is not considered a publication is poster presentations, event flyers, and PowerPoint slides. So basically anything that is not those things, if it's a video, if it's a website, even if you make a Facebook page, that can be considered a publication. So it's very broad. So when in doubt, feel free to ask. It's just not these items that are considered publications. We'd also like to see an acknowledgement statement in your publication, specifically in your peer-reviewed journal articles, and you can just copy this text. Essentially, we've taken the guesswork out for you. This is just what we'd like to see, so that we can be transparent about the funding. Additionally, our communications department will assign a number. This really isn't something that you need to worry about, but just so you know, when you submit a publication, it gets recorded with us internally and we assign it a number so that we can keep up with all of our publications. And this is not just peer-reviewed publications, it's also our flyers, our annual reports, our videos, everything has a number. Additionally, there may come a time where you need to use our logo for something. If you're putting it on a flyer or something like that, if you, even you want to use it for one of your posters or such that you're presenting, you can find it at this website, TechZag/TXSG logos. And we keep all of our logos, the color, the white and the black there. Or you can reach out to us and we'll send it to you. Mia covered this as well, when to submit, but I'd just like to note, it's generally preferred if you can submit as soon as possible, because then we can sort of submit along the way as well. But, also, quarterly progress reports and at your final reports are also acceptable, oh my goodness, acceptable times to submit. And how to submit online via eCgrant, like Mia discussed. Also, if it's a publication that is in any sort of print copies, like you published a book or something like that, we'd appreciate it if you could send us 3 physical copies to this address. And this way it can go in our physical archives. Now, for most journal articles, that's not a concern. And if you'd like to know where these publications end up, there's 2 main places. Now they're on the NOAA Institutional Repository. This is where all NOAA research ends up, and specifically all Sea Grant research ends up. So you can look through there and see what all research that NOAA and Sea Grant have funded. It also ends up in our Sea Grant Texas Sea Grant archives that are on our website. We've got this publications database that basically has every publication that has been done as a result of our funding or our staff since we've been a program, and you can search it on there as well. And a note on that, any digital versions not covered by copyright are available to the public. We want to make sure that this information is publicly available. For that, again, for the copyrighted materials, those peer-reviewed journal articles, this is why we want the accepted manuscript, because that's something that the author owns. It's not something that the publisher owns. Whoops. And theses and dissertations are another publications that we deal with a lot. You may have students working under you who are in some way supported by Sea Grant research. And these are also included in our publications and what we submit. If you need to submit that, the main thing we need to know is if there's an embargo on it, so that we can make sure not to release anything that's under embargo, and please state the embargo date as well. And then before then, we'll just we'll have the citation and the abstract available, but we won't have the document available until the embargo ends. So beyond reporting, why do you do all this? Where does the stuff end up? It's, your reporting, your impact and accomplishment statements are a huge help to my team. This is how we get leads on stories for our Texas Shores magazine. This is a story about Dr. Mike Wetz and his research, because we read about what he was doing through his impact and accomplishment statements, and we thought it would work well in our issue of Texas Shores, and so we wrote a story about him. This is also a publication that we produced that was sort of a summary of all of our researchers, all of our funded researchers through this time period. So we like to tell people about your research in all sorts of forms. We also do press releases if there's something that we really want to share with the media, or web stories for something for the public. And we might even share those with the National Sea Grant. And it might end up on their website. It might also end up with one of your university's marketing and university relations folks, their avenues. And social media, we love to do research spotlights. We do a lot of those. And usually Allie is the one who will reach out to somebody and sort of, maybe ask for pictures or something like that. But we do look at those impact statements and what you've reported to get a lot of that information. And we love to hear your updates. If you want to send us photos or any media coverage, we love to hear those things. We love to share your successes on stuff like social media. So please don't be hesitant to send us any and all of that. And with that, I'll take any questions, and we have got our contact information here as well. And you're welcome to reach out to any of us at any time. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat, I don't believe. Mia, is there anything else you'd like to say?
I think we're at a good point. I hope this has been informative for everyone, and we look forward to working with you. Do work with your sponsor programs office to get that interim account set up. I was answering one PI where it could, when funding is received, for your project, funding receipts, the actual distribution of the funding varies year to year. And of course, it's a cost reimbursable. But so it could take into February when you first get the fully executed agreement, but get your interim account project set up. It looks like, Sarah, you have a question on the average number of publications per project.
Oh, sorry, let me unmute myself. Yeah, that's a great question. For research, I would say, I think we get about two average, 3 maybe. I don't know. Does that sound right to you, Mia?
Yeah, probably so. And it's also not necessarily peer reviewed, but the definition of publications. So the other items that were listed that were defined as a publication besides peer reviewed, whether it's an abstract or a student thesis, poster presentations, unless I think those aren't considered a publication unless there's a recording attached to that PDF presentation document like this one.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Mia.
So we have a publication already.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably depending on students and whatnot, you may have more than, but it probably averages 2 to 3. So another couple of seconds or so. You all can just, email us directly as you think about questions that you might have. Okay. So your first reporting will be, 1st of May, first Friday of May, but you can begin to report on any activities, March and April as we get your project set up. So thank you for your attention and your attendance and your questions. And we will have all this available on our webpage.
Thanks a lot, Mia and Sarah. Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Good luck, guys.
Thank you.
It's a lot to think about.
Okay, ciao, everyone. Thank you, Sarah.